morning. I actually tried to make this video, I think about 6 weeks ago now, even though I was feeling pretty good at the time. I was on the SNRI sertraline, and while it was out of the 7 that I tried, it was really good for my anxiety. Didn't do a lot for my depression, but it was really good for my anxiety. The side effects were crazy, like apart from not being able to sleep, which was really the main reason I couldn't take it anymore. I got so used to having the serotonin, extra serotonin receptors in my gut that I had nausea 24/7. I was even running. I started running again without even sort of slowly coming back to running, which was absolutely crazy. I was just asking for another injury. I used to get injured enough when I was running. I've had 3 people approach me now to write a book on my life, because mainly what happened in my business in West Hobart Gourmet Meats. Originally, my original name was Monday's Meat Supply, then it was Shane's Meats and Treats, then it was Hill Street Gourmet Meats, which was going to turn into one of the biggest naming right court battles in the country. But my wife got breast cancer at the time, and I just didn't want to fight the name that these people thought they could own the right to the name of a street, so they wanted to stop me using the name Hill Street in my name, which my butcher shop was the original Hill Street Butcher. And there was so much confusion because I supplied them meat for many years, but that's another story. But what I want to talk about is I've been journaling everything for the last 8 years, especially, all those doctor's visits when I'd go in and say, oh, the oxy's got its claws into me, I really need to do something about it. And like I said, they kept on saying, you need it for pain, you need it for function. So I just kept on taking it, and I could have said no, I just don't want to do it anymore, but I just believed what the medical specialists told me. And like I said, when I made this video before, there were some good comments that come up quickly on my TikTok. It went viral really quickly, and even these YouTube uploads, when I put them on TikTok, they get, sometimes thousands of views, whereas on here we only get, sometimes, 1,500 or something like that. I only have a few subscribers, and I'm not really doing it professionally at the moment. But the reason of that video that I put up, and like I said, I've had 3 people approach me to write a book, and I have been journaling everything and will write a book, but these chapters in my life keep on happening that are quite interesting to a lot of people. I started my butcher shop when I was 19, which I've said before. I left my dad's business working with him in his butcher shop, and I actually got out in my own business even a year before I finished my apprenticeship, because working with family and living with family at the time just wasn't good for me. Like Dad was a pretty hard taskmaster, and I just needed to do it on my own, and I wanted to do it better because I had my own modern ideas of thinking and how to take butchery forward into the future, like introducing prepared meals, because I'm a bit of a chef at heart, and I'm a pretty good chef. Always wanted to be a chef, and I was going to be a chef all my life. I did cooking classes in school and whatever, and but then I realised I like my social life too much, so it was just easy to walk out of Gilston Bay High School 300 metres into my dad's butcher shop, and I could see that my dad did all right in butchery, and I thought, okay, I can do that in sort of normal hours, and I was the first butcher to ever in Hobart to open on a Saturday. No other butcher shops were open on a Saturday. Then I became one of the only 7-day-a-week operators. So I worked really hard for a lot of years, and probably why my body is the way it is. But the reason I wanted to do this video, all the mass murderers and murderers in Hobart for some reason were attracted to my butcher shop. I'll tell you one. I'll go into these stories at length, in other videos, but this is just a bit of a teaser. Like Andrew Denton was a bit like the Parkinson of the London TV. Graham Norton now, similar. Andrew Denton, his program Enough Road, they did a segment on free cab drivers, and Andrew was great at bringing out the best in people if he liked you, but if you had sort of a sketchy background, or like, he could bring out the worst in people on his program. And I was told to be very careful what I say and do, because it could ruin my career potentially. But on the contrary, because Andrew loves small butchers, his producer John Casimir, they did a ring around. I think it was about 500 butchers, and I was about the 20th butcher they rang, and they said, well, you're in straight away, just from a couple of the stories that I told about these murderers and whatever, and the funny things that happen in my shop. We went on that show, The Three Butchers. We're on the back half of the show. Jerry Seinfeld was in the green room next door. It was crazy, because that show that night, we found out a couple of weeks later that the Butchers segment, it's a live show, a live audience, and we actually, the back half of the show outrated the front half of the show. And that sort of said something to me, that, the fact that, the back half of the show, just three ordinary butchers, outrated Jerry Seinfeld. Like that video that I said that I made, I was a bit big-headed about that, because I was on this sertraline that was making me sort of a little bit manic. I was speaking too fast. Like I said, I was running. I was jumping from sort of, one bit of a section of a conversation to the next, and it really wasn't making a lot of sense. So I just start by saying, in 2013, when I was running the Boston Marathon, which sort of where my depression really started. I've always had anxiety, but when I was running the Boston Marathon in 2013, I'd just finished the race, and my wife had watched me finish in 2010, and that was right where the first bomb exploded. But she decided, seeing our youngest son was only 10 at the time, she'd go around to Commonwealth Avenue, where our friend had his condo, Frank Stowalski. So she went around there so they could see me actually finish, and they did. So what happened, I'd finished the marathon and thought I'll wait for them. Our hotel was a Lowe's hotel on the Back Bay area, right on the finish line. But I thought, I'll wait for the family to get back, because that we had SIM cards in our phones, and American SIM cards, so we were, texting and calling. And anyway, so Alison and the three children, so my youngest was 10 at the time, my eldest was 16, they were on their way back, and the bombs exploded, and I knew straight away they were bombs. I could just see. Then I started to try and ring Alison to see, because it was just, no one really knew. We knew there were bombs, but no one really knew if there were more or whatever. So when they finally stopped the race, you couldn't get through that area, and I was trying, and they were just holding me back. And in the end, I went back to my hotel and went straight into lockdown straight away. I wasn't allowed out of the hotel then. So I'm on my Facebook, and I'd ran my fastest marathon that day when I was 50. So I say I outran a bomb. But what happened, I lost them for about 90 minutes, knowing bombs had gone off, and knowing they were walking back through that area. And they were close enough to the second bomb that they were, sort of choking on the smoke that the bomb had produced. And my daughter, when she got back, my youngest son was traumatised. We're all traumatised, but my youngest son was really bad. And plus there was a lot of media following us around, asking us questions, and I was a little bit high on the adrenaline of running a marathon, running my best marathon, but it's still at the same time having all this horrible feeling of the bombs and losing my family for 90 minutes, not knowing if they'd been blown up or not. And it was honestly the worst 90 minutes of my life. And I I really struggled after that for years with sort of the guilt that my selfishness from running, which we'd gone over there and spent a lot of money taking our kids over there, because my wife had just finished breast cancer treatment. We thought we'd treat the kids and ourselves to a bit of a holiday after the marathon, and I just felt so guilty for years, and I just should have probably got some help then, you know, like psychology help, which I have now every month. And I carried that for, like, I was consumed by it for 6 years. And like I said, one time one of my family members just said, get over it, we're just sick of hearing about it. And so I just bottled it all up then, and finally got diagnosed with PTSD, on top of all, you know, sort of my anxiety and everything. So that's where everything started for me. But back to the butcher shop. Okay, I'll start with when I first started in my butcher shop. I was 19. There was a really crazy murder in Hobart, Rory Jack Thompson. He cut up his wife and flushed her down the toilet, and he only lived a few doors down from the butcher shop in the conjoined houses right next to the Hill Street grocer. He'd actually come into my butcher shop and purchased a side of lamb just before he killed his wife and cut her up. And he'd purchased a side of lamb to cut up into pieces to flush it down the loo to see if he could, you know, flush it down the loo that way. An old customer of mine came in at the time, and he was an old sort of reformed alcoholic, so he'd tell you the same stories every time he came in the shop. But, you know, I used to sort of humour him and go along with it, but it was quite annoying that you'd hear that same story of, I just walked past, because he lived right next door to Rory Jack, I just walked past and I saw a head on the table. And apparently that was right. The head sat on the table for a day because that couldn't be disposed of so quickly. And that became like a famous bloody murder here in Hobart. The second one was the worst mass murderer in modern history, Martin Bryant at the time, before that, before terrorism became a thing, and before, you know, the Las Vegas shooting. Martin killed 36 people, and they were personal customers of mine, Martin Bryant and Helen Harvey. And Rodney Butler was working for me at the time, my first butcher I employed, and Helen and Martin would pull up in this sort of like a Tarago van with all the seats taken out, because they had they had like 50 dogs and 50 cats, and no sort of seats in the back. And I remember once I carried the meat out of the car and there was like a little miniature horse in the back, and a chicken and dogs and cats, and they smelled really bad because apparently the house really smelled, so therefore it sort of got into like clothing and whatever. Although they dressed nice and fancy, the smell was like in the shop was like, we'd have to open the door and spray sort of Glen 20 it was back in the time, something you could spray in a meat business without, you know, being too like pino clean, smell too disinfectant-y. But what had happened, like, they were fantastic customers, so we had to really treat them well because they fed all these animals, because Helen was an heiress to the Tatslotto people. So she was a multi-millionaire, and with this money rolling in from the Tatslotto, from the lotto every month, they just had money to burn. And she was so eccentric and a lovely lady. But Martin back then, you know, he had like a college boy haircut, and he had this really blonde hair and these really blue eyes, you know, those blue eyes that you can nearly see through. But like, they told me things were a long time before any of the, you know, the carnage happened at Port Arthur where he shot all those people. Like, they had a farm, Helen had a farm up at the, up in the Midlands in Tasmania, and they came in once and said, oh, we've had a death on the farm. The farmhand, the manager, has rolled his tractor into the dam and has passed away. And it just didn't sound right. How does someone roll a tractor into the dam and die? But this was, you know, sort of something that just sort of stuck in my head. But what had happened, I had a bench seat in my butcher shop, and when they'd come into the shop, Martin would be sitting on the bench seat like this, and I'd be there, and he'd be sort of looking at me like that, just his stare, and it really, really haunted me. And after serving them for a few months, they said, well, would you mind delivering this meat to us? And Martin kept on saying, oh, you'll have to come up and see the house and see the animals. And I said, yeah, you know, because they'd spend back in those days a couple of $100 a week, which back in that time was a lot of money, you know, like your average customer was probably spending $15 or $20. So, but I just didn't feel right. And I'm not saying I was going to get slaughtered or whatever, but I just, after they told me about this farm accident, I just didn't feel right, just the way Martin looked at me. And even Rodney used to say to me, and he used to like stir me up, he used to like say, well, I think he likes you. So, he used to call me Shaggy, I don't know why, but he said, I think he likes you, Shaggy. And I said, well, you're delivering the meat, I'm not. And so Rodney delivered the meat, and they come back and said, they're not real happy with you. And I said, why? And they said, well, they wanted you to deliver the meat, especially Martin. And I said, well, I didn't feel comfortable. And then, anyway, the next week they ordered the meat. Rodney went back there, and they said, you can tell Shane that'll be the last order. See, he couldn't go out of his way because they lived in the next suburb, Newtown, probably a 7 or 8 minute drive to the big property, the big house. And it wasn't a big house, but a big house. So they stopped dealing with me, and then you know, that was just forgotten. You know, we went on, and my doctor at the time, Dr. Bowie, he was also charged with murder for murdering his wife by strangling her or choking her, apparently trying to pleasure her with the old choke technique. That was what he said. They were a pretty kinky group of people at the time, so everyone knew that. There was sort of a group of them in Hobart, and he was my doctor. So, you know, there's another murderer. Bob Chappell was another customer, and his wife Sue, who also got put in jail for murdering him. They still haven't found Bob's body. He was a lovely guy. I think he was some sort of professor in the Royal Hobart Hospital, but he was on his boat and went missing, and I don't know if I can call her a murderer, because even though she was proven guilty and put in jail, a lot of appeals she got out, but she was a nasty woman. Like, she also had a property, a well-to-do woman up on the up in the Midlands of Tasmania, and would come in the butcher shop and verbally abuse all of us in front of a shop full of customers, and say, you rip off, you know, that I get this for my beef and you sell it for that, you know. So she accused us of making all the money, but, you know, the middleman, the wholesale that we were buying from, was probably making more than we were. And she was a nasty piece of work, a really nasty piece of work. And, you know, so we've got all these sort of mass murderers, murderers in my shop, and it was sort of crazy to think that why me? Why this shop? You know, why is everyone drawn to this shop? And another really nice guy who just lived down the road, there used to be sort of a halfway house, and over the road from the pharmacy, because a lot of them were on the methadone program, so they'd be sort of lined up outside the pharmacy, and I used to think, drug addicts, how did I ever know I never had to be on a methadone program, but how did why did I ever judge those people? I didn't know their backstories, just like the pharmacies don't know your backstories. So, you know, I probably, you know, judged people the wrong way back then. And anyway, the guy down in from the halfway house that we befriended, he loved my chili sausages. He like knifed a guy and killed a guy down in Hobart. So, but Martin and what he did to, honestly, you know, like he slaughtered 36 people in the Broad Arrow Cafe in Port Arthur. He even shot, like, you know, when he came back after shooting all the people in the cafe, he stopped on the side of the road. There was a mother and 2 little girls, and he just slaughtered the girls, you know, shot them with the big, powerful, you know, automatic weapon. You know, 2 little children and 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 the mum, and you know, honestly, and knowing that they were customers of mine, and it was at the same time my first son was born, so that's like 27 years ago now. And I remember we'd taken Tyson down to introduce him to our grandparents, his great-grandparents at 7 Mile Beach, and my cousin, my auntie was driving up to see her mum and dad, and said, gee, there's something big, there must be a plane crash or something, because they live down, you know, sort of on the road to Port Arthur. And they said there were cars and ambulances and police cars and helicopters and, you know, just a procession of all these, you know, first responders. And she said it has to be a plane crash. There's no way you would have that many emergency responders and police and etc. You know, just in a single file. And then, like, later that afternoon, we found out, you know, first it was 16, and it got up to like 36. My neighbour and I were shouting over the fence. So that was a time in my life when, you know, my first son had been born. I was happy. And when I opened the newspaper the next day, or saw on the cover of the newspaper the next day, I said, my God, it's Martin Bryant. But then he had really long hair, long surfy hair. He drove a yellow Volvo with a surfboard bolted to the roof, so he looked like a surfy. And he actually ended up inheriting all of Helen's money. Sometimes he'd just get on a plane and go to London and get off again and get back on, apparently just so he could talk to people on, you know, that big long London flight. You know, that's the sort of person that he was. I always thought he was a bit weird, but I never thought he was a mass murderer. I just thought he was a bit crazy, but there was something that scared me enough that I wouldn't take the meat to the house. But I hadn't seen him for quite a while, but we all knew what he drove. And like I said, when I saw the cover on the paper of Martin, you know, you're on a high from your first son being born, you're the happiest time in your life, but this just really got to me. It just got to me to, honestly, I can't describe how I felt. I felt physically sick, that I vomited. And about a month before that, apparently he'd driven to like Richmond, which is another touristy attraction, and I said to the butchers, look, what the fuck's that Volvo doing? Because he'd park out the front of my butcher shop on the side, and he'd just be sort of looking in the butcher shop, and like I hadn't seen him for a few years, and I just couldn't work out why he was sort of driving around the block and kept on stopping outside my butcher shop. And he did this for about a week, and this was about, I suppose a month before the murders. And look, I don't know, but I just had a feeling that, you know, maybe, I don't know, was I going to be the butcher shop going to be one of his targets first? I don't know. And then he thought he'd do something bigger and better. I don't know. We'll never know that. But it's something that, you know, like I said, these stories that I've got, and a lot of funny stories. Like I said, when we're on enough road, you know, some of the stories, like, you know, if you're American, you call them hot dogs, but we have these big Savaloys, big red long Savaloys, you know, and stories that I had the people in stitches, absolutely in stitches, a live audience, you know, like back in the day, you could say things to customers and, you know, you could get away with you could have a joke without worrying about where you're going to be, you know, some sort of law case coming against you, like, you know, like, and I got these sayings from my dad or my uncle who had a butcher shop at the time, like the lady had come in and there'd be other people everywhere in the shop, and she'd say, oh, can I have 2 Savaloys, Shane, 2 big Savaloys? And I'd say, oh, you want one to eat as well, do you? And things like that, you know, like old ladies had come in on a cold day like today with snow on the mountain, and I go, oh, it's a bit chilly today, and they say, oh, it's nice in the sun, and I'd turn around and say, it's better in the daughter. You know, just crazy stuff like that, and we'd ever laugh and get away with it, and, you know, it was just fun times, and, you know, it's a shame that those times had to end and the world is the way it is, but that is the way the world is now, and, you know, I'm just happy that we sort of, you know, I got to live in that time in my life where, you know, I had fun in my shop, but like I said, all these murderers seem to, you know, end up being customers of mine. So, you know, that's something that sort of did play on me for a long time, you know, added to all the other things that have happened. And like I said, this is just a teaser of some of these stories that I'm going to tell. But the one of Martin Bryant, that's just one that, you know, that'll haunt me to the day I die. It was just like, you know, yeah, that's tormenting actually. It really is. So, yeah, like I just felt like I wanted to upload that one today as a bit of a teaser because, like, I think the real stories are yet to come. Now I want to try and do this a little bit better and probably use my big camera with a film and edit it properly. And I have got a microphone in there, but I can't hook it up for some reason. It just won't connect to my phone, and I've got the gimbal and everything. But yeah, if you want to hear the stories, like and subscribe because, you know, they're coming. And like I said, I've got a journal full of stories to tell. I've got 3 of these journals, and like I said, I can't write the book yet because there's still chapters to come, but maybe 2 books, I don't know. But a lot of things have happened in my life, and you know, and people seem to think that, you know, that could be a very interesting book for people because they like to hear about people's real life events, you know, real life circumstances and events. And like I said, the chapters they keep on coming. So if you got this far in, I'd just like and subscribe, and you know, I think you'll get a laugh. I think you'll definitely, you know, be taken back by some of the stories that I will tell of what happened in that time. But yeah, that's just a short one today. And hope you're all having a great weekend, and we'll catch you later. Cheers.